My topic for this conversation is addressing how we as mentors can hold a person in their grief. So, obviously, there are many forms of grief, and in our pandemic days, people are suffering a lot of different kinds of losses of opportunities, losses of businesses, of parnasa, of loss of control, loss of knowing what's going to be in the near future or in the future, where we're going to be. We're letting go of a lot of things that we've been able to be in control of. So there's losses there. And obviously, there's also losses of people, of relationships. And that's the kind of loss that I want to focus in on, knowing that that loss is then can be extrapolated out to other losses and other kinds of griefs that people experience. But the specific kind of grief that I want to hone in on is the one that comes with losing a person, losing a loved one, losing a relative or a spouse or a child or a parent or just a dear loved one in one's lives, and the loss that comes along with that, and how to hold a person who's grieving. So I'm going to start with a saying written by Earl Goldman, who wrote, "Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity, the price you pay for love." In our loving, in our connections, in our relationships, when we lose those relationships and that connection and that physical ability to express love to another and have that person in our lives, we experience grief. And how we express that grief is fundamental to how we move through the grief. If we don't have a way to express the grief, it can turn into depression. It can turn into a lot of psychosomatic and psychological dysfunction. And so I like to quote Dr. Edith Eva Eger, who writes in her book The Choice that the antidote to depression is expression. And I'd like to posit that we as mentors can be, certainly in the early stages of grief and later on, can be people who provide a safe space, provide an opportunity for people who come to us or in our world to help them, to help people create a space where they can express the grief that they are experiencing. Again, grief is a normal, natural, primary instinct that we have, and it's sort of like an arrow that doesn't have a target. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know where it's going to land. We don't always have a goal of what target it's hitting. However, it is a very deep and fundamental emotion that we have, and I very much agree and feel that it's very true that the way to get through the grief is to experience the grief. And we as mentors can hold a person, can provide that safe space for a person to grieve. How do we do that? We do that by humbly listening, by silencing ourselves, silencing our ego, silencing our need to fix a problem. I need to find a solution. I need to pontificate as to why something is happening, and just to listen to the person. Just allow them, like we learned from our restorer, how to pay a shiva call. A shiva call is predicated on the mourner being the one who leads the conversation. I heard grief described as a snowflake. No snowflakes are identical. Everybody has a different way, a unique way in which they express the grief that they're feeling. And for us to come in and have a timetable for somebody, or have the stages of grief that we feel that other people should go through, is undermining our ability to provide the safe space for other people. When we recognize that grief is like a snowflake and that we don't really know what the other person is experiencing. We might have our own experiences, but let's quieten that. Let's not share our experiences when when we're providing space for somebody else, when we hold somebody else in their grief. Again, the foundation of how to do that is to silence ourselves and to be there compassionately, lovingly, listen and let them lead the way. Maybe a person wants to speak. And again, speaking is a very powerful way in which a person can express the grief that they're feeling. Often when those words come up, if they come from the heart, they come with tears, they come with a lot of maybe other ways of expressing the grief that they're feeling. But let's see that actually as a very important way in which the pain and the grief that goes along with the losses is expressed through words, through crying, through emotions. Not everybody's going to be so eloquent or be able to use their words. Perhaps somebody might write as a form of expression. People might dance, people might garden, people might take a walk, people might listen to music, whatever it is. Providing that safe space where we acknowledge the loss that somebody's going through, we acknowledge that there's a pain attached to their experiences, and we provide that safe space for them. Grief is chaotic, it's messy, it's unpredictable, but what we can do is we can acknowledge the grief. We can understand that the only way through is to experience the grief, to not be frightened of another person's pain, to be able to sit there with them, as Brene Brown would describe. You'll literally get into the pit with a person and hold their hand. I might not be able to fix it, I can't fix it, and I'm not going to tell you my experiences. I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to love you and feel compassion for you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to have a timetable for you. I'm truly, what am I going to do? I'm going to acknowledge your grief. I'm going to allow you to express your emotions, and I'm going to have an open heart. I'm not going to pity you. I'm going to focus on you. I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to provide that unconditional support that you need so that you can express, you, the person coming with the grief, that you can express those feelings. And I think I'm only allowed 7 minutes, so I'm going to wrap up here. And again say that in the early stages of grieving, which I think in our pandemic days, there's a lot of grief. People are experiencing loss of jobs, loss of future, loss of money, loss of relationships, a lot of losses that are going on. And what we can do as mentors is listen and provide a safe space for people to express the feelings they're feeling, to not be judgmental about those feelings, not have a timetable for how the feelings will come and go, and to recognize that the grief and the loss, that each person is unique to them, like snowflakes are unique. No two snowflakes are the same. So too, no two experiences of grief are the same. And if we can humbly remove ourselves from trying to fix the problem and trying to find solutions, and understand that the way through grief is to grieve, then I think we can provide huge amounts of support for the people in our lives.